Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, April 8th, 2025. United States Trade Representative Jamieson Greer defends President Donald Trump's tariffs before the Senate Finance Committee. The reciprocal tariffs and some of the president's threatened additional tariffs take effect at midnight tonight, including 104% on China. On Wall Street today, the Dow down again, 320 points. President Trump joins coal miners at the White House to sign an executive order to increase mining use and export of what he calls clean coal. House Speaker Mike Johnson says the House will go ahead this week with a vote on the Senate version of the budget resolution, even though some House Republicans do not support the relatively small spending cuts versus a House-passed version. Some of the holdouts meet with President Trump today at the White House. House implements a way for members who are new parents to register how they would have voted when they miss votes. Some Democrats say that's a far cry from the original bipartisan proposal for true proxy voting. Attorney General Pam Bondi talks about the Supreme Court allowing the Trump administration to use the Alien Enemies Act for deportations, and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth visits the Panama Canal. All that and more coming up on Washington Today. From Associated Press, the nation's top trade representative said Tuesday that President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs are already getting results, bringing other countries to the negotiating table to discuss reducing their trade barriers. United States Trade Representative Jamieson Greer addressed the Senate Finance Committee a day after global markets swung wildly, and some business leaders lambasted the president's aggressive bid to raise tariffs on almost every nation on earth. Greer testified that about 50 countries have sought talks to escape Trump's import tariffs. He said, for example, that Vietnam is cutting its own tariffs on apples, almonds, and cherries. The import taxes are designed to reduce America's massive trade deficits, but Greer conceded that it will take time and that the adjustment might be challenging at times. That was from Associated Press. Here's part of the hearing. Senator Maggie Hassan, Democrat from New Hampshire, questioning the trade representative.
The president's national sales tax is increasing prices for families. It's also causing huge losses in Americans' retirement savings. Ambassador Greer, would the administration reverse course if the president's tariffs led to 10% inflation?
Senator, the president is fixed in his purpose. This trade deficit and the offshoring and loss of manufacturing jobs is something that's persisted for too long, and it's dangerous.
I understand your justification for the policy, even though there are some very contradictory justifications coming out of the administration. But my question is, what's the inflation rate where you guys would reverse course? 10% inflation that I just asked you about, that is higher inflation than we saw at the peak of the COVID economic crisis. But you aren't going to say here today that you would reverse course even if you created inflation as high as we had at the peak of the COVID economic crisis.
I think the most serious inflation we saw was during the Biden administration. When we did tariffs in the first term, inflation went down. I just don't, it's not going to be a one-to-one. Inflation about how much money you're putting into the supply.
Well, let's just be really clear that the Trump administration is here today to say that even if inflation hits Americans' pocketbooks at 10% because of these tariffs, then the Trump administration is still going to go charging ahead. So, Ambassador, would the administration reverse course if the president's tariffs caused a 50% stock market crash, which would hurt Americans' retirement savings even more than they've been hurt in the last 10 days or so?
Senator, the fundamentals of the economy are so strong. We had 228,000 jobs last month. We have 9,000 additional manufacturing jobs from the month before.
So again, your answer is even if the stock market crashes 50%, which is how much the stock market crashed in the Great Recession, you're not going to say here today that you would reverse course even if you crash the stock market and harm retirement savings as drastically as happened during the Great Recession in 2007.
Senator, your hypotheticals are not consistent with the history we have seen with the use of tariffs.
My hypotheticals are based on the fact that a lot of Americans are looking at their 401ks today and wondering how much of a lifestyle change they are going to have, or whether they're going to be able to retire when they plan to, because of the recklessness and haphazard nature of the Trump administration's imposition of tariffs. Nothing was thought out about this. This has been a haphazard, incompetent effort, and it's showing.
Senator Maggie Hassan, Democrat from New Hampshire, questioning the United States Trade Representative Jamieson Greer at today's Senate Finance Committee hearing. New York Times writes in a social media post on Tuesday, President Trump described a call with South Korea's acting president, Han Duck-soo, about trade and tariffs, and that South Korean officials were heading to the United States for talks. He also expressed optimism that a trade war with China could be averted. He wrote, China also wants to make a deal badly, but they don't know how to get it started. We are waiting for their call. It will happen. From the Washington Post, Beijing sharply criticized President Trump's threat to impose an additional 50% tariff on China as blackmail Tuesday, ratcheting up the tensions between the world's two largest economies amid a burgeoning trade war. China's Commerce Ministry said in a statement, the U.S. threat to escalate tariffs on China is a mistake on top of a mistake. China will never accept it. If the U.S. insists on its own way, China will fight to the end. That was from the Washington Post. More from the Senate Finance Committee hearing. Here's Senator John Cornyn, Republican of Texas, questioning U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer.
Our friends in Australia basically have put up barriers to the export of beef from the United States. My state, Texas, happens to produce a lot of beef cattle. And Australia basically denies access to its huge market, but not as a result of tariffs so much as non-tariff barriers to trade. Could you speak to that?
Yes, Senator, and it's always surprising because we have a free trade agreement with Australia, and we would expect that we would have fair and reciprocal trade. Last year, I think we imported about $3 billion worth of Australian beef, and we exported $0 of American beef to Australia. And it's not just beef. Australia also blocks on specious, fake science grounds, the export of fresh and frozen U.S. pork. So it's incredible that they do this. We have zero exports of the fresh and frozen U.S. pork to Australia.
I find it interesting that people express surprise at President Trump's policies when he's been talking about these policies for, best I can tell, for decades, and how unfair trading arrangements are between various countries. And indeed, some of these unfair trading practices have resulted in the deindustrialization of America. We've exported manufacturing to Asia, and particularly China and other countries, that now appear to be willing to hold us hostage to those supply chains. A few years ago, we passed the Chips and Science Act. We worked with Secretary Pompeo, Secretary Ross during President Trump's first administration, and later was signed by President Biden, but to bring advanced semiconductor manufacturing back on shore, because we recognized that the vulnerability that existed if there was another pandemic, there's a natural disaster, or heaven forbid, a military conflict break out in Asia, we wouldn't have access to these advanced semiconductors that run everything from your cell phone to the avionics on an F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. But China has basically held us hostage and continues to use some of these vulnerabilities to our detriment. For example, critical mineral processing. Would you speak to the vulnerability that exists as a result of China basically processing 90% of the critical minerals in the world that are essential for our daily lives?
Yes, Senator, and that figure is always one that gives me great concern, the 90% of the processing. We do have critical minerals in the United States. We have lithium here. We have other critical minerals here. And a lot of it is that China has centralized the processing of minerals, right? We have in the Western Hemisphere, in Bolivia, in Chile, we have all kinds of critical minerals, and that's in our hemisphere. But they get sent to China, they're processed, and they come here. And then if China wants to exercise economic coercion or other practices, they do have a stranglehold on these kinds of things. That's a very dangerous situation to be in. I mean, this is part of the urgency of what we're talking about. And I think as the Trump administration certainly takes action on trade, but also takes action on the environmental side and permitting and regulation, that's an area where we can actually have more of that activity here in the United States, or we can work with our trading partners to try to incentivize production there as well.
U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer at a Finance Committee hearing, questioned by Senator John Cornyn, Republican from Texas. CNBC writes that President Trump's tariffs announcement has sparked a global sell-off, leading to losses for many investors across the world. The world's richest people saw tens of billions of dollars wiped from their net worths in a matter of days. One notable exception, Berkshire Hathaway CEO Warren Buffett, whose net worth has grown by $11.5 billion since the start of 2025. According to Bloomberg's Billionaires Index, Buffett is defying that downward trend with a cautious approach. The Oracle of Omaha compiled a record $334 billion in cash at the end of 2024, according to SEC filings. That was from CNBC. More from the Senate Finance Committee hearing with U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer. Senator Tom Tillis, Republican of North Carolina, said he hopes that President Trump's tariff strategy works.
Every time we talk about people having patience, we need to understand that the Founding Fathers made damn sure that that patience was never more than about 14 months, really. Everything that we need to do to know what the political environment is going to be about next year, it's going to be done by February of next year. So in your mind, do you believe that over the course of the next 14 months, we're going to have a level of certainty, and the people in the trailer park that I grew up in who are going to bear the brunt of some of these short-term cost increases, maybe some job displacement for a period of time, how are they going to be feeling Groundhog Day 2027 or 2026? Do we feel like the majority of this will be resolved? And I'll be able to thank whoever thought that the alla prima approach was a good idea, because that's about the timeline we've got to work with.
Well, Senator, these people who voted for the president, is the same situation I grew up in. You know that.
I agree, but let me just finish here because I don't want to get in the way of my colleagues. Yes. I'll be 65 in August. Every day, 11,400 people celebrate their 65th birthday. That's 4 million a year. So there, let's say from 60 to 65, people look at their 401k statements. They did vote for President Trump. They voted for me. I hope that they will again in both cases. Well, maybe not the president, but I intend to run for re-election. I'm just trying to figure out if they're going to feel good about this, because a long-term play in American politics and a long-term play in American policy, public policy formation, is about 12 months from the beginning of an administration. I wish you well, but I am skeptical. Thank you.
Senator Tom Tillis, Republican from North Carolina, questioning the U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer at today's Finance Committee hearing. We covered it live on C-SPAN Radio, and you can find it in its entirety at our video library at cspan.org. Over at the White House, the Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said the tariffs will take effect tonight as scheduled.
You mentioned the 70 countries or so. I'm curious, though, under what conditions at this point would President Trump talk to President Xi about tariffs?
Look, I just spoke to the president about this, and he believes that China wants to make a deal with the United States. He believes China has to make a deal with the United States. It was a mistake for China to retaliate. The president, when America is punched, he punches back harder. That's why there will be 104% tariffs going into effect on China tonight at midnight. But the president believes that Xi and China want to make a deal. They just don't know how to get that started. And the president also wanted me to tell all of you that if China reaches out to make a deal, he'll be incredibly gracious, but he's going to do what's best for the American people.
So China has to call first?
The Chinese want to make a deal. They just don't know how to do it. But the president will be implementing these 104% tariffs on China tonight.
And under what conditions might he consider lowering tariffs on China at this point?
It would be imprudent of me to tell you those conditions here from the podium.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt at her news conference at the White House. Later in the day, President Donald Trump said that the United States is taking in $2 billion per day currently from tariffs. Caroline Leavitt was also asked about the war of words over tariffs between Elon Musk, the presidential advisor for cutting government spending, and Peter Navarro, the White House trade advisor. Today, Musk called Navarro truly a moron and dumber than a sack of bricks over comments over Musk's businesses.
There's been some public sparring between Elon Musk and the president's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, on some of these tariffs. Musk actually referred to Navarro today as being, quote, dumber than a sack of bricks. Are you at all, or is the administration, the president, all concerned that this is maybe impacting the public's understanding of these tariffs? It might be messing with the message on it?
No, look, these are obviously two individuals who have very different views on trade and on tariffs. Boys will be boys, and we will let their public sparring continue. And you guys should all be very grateful that we have the most transparent administration in history. And I think it also speaks to the president's willingness to hear from all sides, that he has people at the highest levels of this government in this White House who have very diverse opinions on very diverse issues, but the president takes all opinions in mind, and then he makes the best decision based on the best interests of the American public.
The White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt at her news conference at the White House. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer talked about tariffs today. He told the House of Commons Liaison Committee, which is made up of the chairs of the other committees in Parliament, that he is disappointed to see tariffs in place, but that Great Britain should not immediately retaliate, but instead pursue negotiations. He's questioned by the committee chair, Meg Hillier, a Labour MP, same party as the Prime Minister.
Prime Minister, I just wanted to kick off with obviously the big issue of the last few days. Growth is obviously your government's primary objective, but in the light of what happened last week with the introduction of tariffs by the United States and predictions of a global recession, are you looking at revisiting your economic plans as a government?
I think what's happened in the last few days, last week or so, is obviously very challenging for us and very challenging around the world. And I'm very disappointed to see tariffs in place. I don't think that they are good for our economy or for economies around the world. My instinct is that we shouldn't jump in with both feet to retaliate. So in that sense, I'm not changing my plans. I think calm, collected response. Obviously, we have to keep our options on the table and do the preparatory work for retaliation if necessary. But I think that trying to negotiate an arrangement which mitigates the tariffs is better. But I think more fundamentally, in answer to your question, I don't think what's happened in the last few days is a temporary passing phase. I think it's a changing world order. I think the world is changing before us as a new era. And therefore, I do think there are two ways in which our plans don't so much change as turbocharge. The first is we have to do much more and go further and faster in making sure our economy is resilient and thriving. And I gave some examples of that yesterday. You'll have seen them, so I won't repeat them here, in relation to Z mandates and life sciences. They're a down payment. They're an example of what I think we need to do here to go further and faster in the changes to our economy. Secondly, we have to talk to other like-minded countries about lowering the barriers to trade between us, and that's why I spent a good deal of the weekend on the phone to international leaders, partly gauging their response, exchanging notes, understanding how they were approaching the challenge, but also having a broader discussion about how they're likely to respond to those. So the plan, I mean, the priority of growth doesn't change, the fundamentals don't change, but in two respects, which is turbocharging the changes we need in our economy. Yes, that needs to go further and faster. I'm absolutely clear about that. And secondly, lowering barriers to trade with other countries. Again, we need to go further and faster, in my view.
The British Prime Minister Keir Starmer testifying before the House of Commons Liaison Committee in London today. Story from The Guardian. Amid the economic maelstrom of Donald Trump's trade war, drink makers might take a small drop of comfort. The EU has dropped plans to hit American bourbon with retaliatory tariffs. Bourbon and other U.S. whiskeys have escaped EU countermeasures after heavy lobbying from the EU's drinks-producing countries, such as whiskey-making Ireland and the wine behemoths Italy and France, who feared their alcohol industries would become casualties of a global trade war. Bourbon and wine have been removed from a draft list of U.S. goods that will be subject to EU retaliatory tariffs in response to Trump's duties on steel and aluminum announced last month, according to a leaked list first reported by Reuters. EU member states will vote on the final list on Wednesday. The list of potential targets facing mostly 25% retaliatory tariffs now ranges from almonds to yachts via diamonds and dental floss, soya beans, and steel parts. That was from The Guardian. Wall Street today, the Dow down 320, NASDAQ down 335, S&P down 79. From NBC News, President Donald Trump signed executive orders Tuesday to bolster the country's declining coal industry, relaxing restrictions on coal mining, leasing, and exports. What the White House said was an effort to meet the energy-intensive needs of artificial intelligence data centers. The president was at the White House in the East Room, standing on a dais with coal miners.
Now, under the executive order that I will sign in a few moments, we're slashing unnecessary regulations that targeted the beautiful clean coal. We will rapidly expedite leases for coal mining on federal lands, and these two gentlemen are going to do a real job of it. You've already started. And we'll streamline permitting. We will end the government bias against coal, and we're going to unlock the sweeping authorities of Defense Production Act, the Defense Production Act, to turbocharge coal mining in America. They made it impossible. You actually, I know a friend of mine has a plant. He said, you know, it's a shame. I'm ripping it down and I'm replacing it with another form of energy. I won't tell you because it's also very good, but it's not as powerful as this. He said, you know, the plant I'm building, the new plant, is literally half as good. It's no less, you know, it's not probably even as good environmentally, but he said it produced half the power for more money, much more money. It'll never compete with that beautiful plant I have down the road, which was really a modernized coal plant. Well, he'll be happy to know that he can open that plant up very quickly, and it's going to produce a lot. But he was complaining. He said, this is so much better. He wasn't doing that as politicking me. He was doing that because that's what he felt. And he knew every form of energy. We talked about that. He knew every form of energy. But our government is going to do something that's very different. And I don't think even you two know about this. This was my idea from about 15 minutes before I got up here. We're going to guarantee that we have a strong business for many years to come, that your coal companies and your miners don't get all excited about their jobs, and then should a radical left liberal become president, they end the business right away, and somebody's built a plant and spent hundreds of millions of dollars in building a plant, and the plant is going to be closed because a Democrat got in or a liberal got in. They're opposed to coal, and Republicans are very much for it, clean coal. And we're going to give a guarantee that the business will not be terminated by the ups and downs of the world of politics.
President Donald Trump at the White House signing an executive order. Again, from the NBC News article, the coal industry has been in decline in the U.S. for more than a decade. In 2023, coal generated about 16% of total electricity in the country, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, down sharply from roughly 45% in 2010. This is Washington Today. From the Washington Examiner, House Republican leaders are turning to President Donald Trump to convince holdout Republicans to pass a budget resolution this week, though fiscal conservatives say a White House pressure campaign may not be enough. At least 30 House Republicans are standing firm against the Trump-backed budget resolution coming back from the Senate over concerns that the proposed spending cuts do not go far enough. A handful of holdouts have been invited to a meeting with the White House on Tuesday afternoon as part of the latest effort to get them on board to pass the resolution, which would kickstart the process of enacting Trump's tax, energy, border priorities under a process called reconciliation. That was from the Washington Examiner. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, said at a news conference today the House will vote this week on what the Senate sent back over.
I want to make 4 important points about the Senate's amendment to our House resolution. Number 1, the budget resolution is not the law. Okay, all this does is it allows us to continue the process, begin drafting the actual legislation that really counts, and that's the one big, beautiful bill. Number 2, the Senate amendment makes no changes to the reconciliation instructions that we put into the budget resolution. So our objectives remain intact. Number 3, any final reconciliation bill has to include historic spending reductions that we included in our resolution, while also safeguarding essential programs. And you've heard a commitment from us over and over that will happen, and the president has said it himself over and over as well. The fourth point is that reconciliation will be a collaborative process between the House and Senate. You're going to see the Republican Party and both chambers working together as one team. I know that's a rare occasion, and people don't really know what that looks like, but we're actually going to do it this time. The House is not going to participate in an us versus them charade. We won't do it. To secure and accomplish our mission, we got to be working together and rowing in the same direction. And I'm fiercely committed to doing that, and so is Leader Thune and our members on both sides. Passing this amendment just allows us to get off the sidelines and get on the field and start this game. It's the kickoff, so to speak, with one of my football metaphors, and we got to get this done. Republicans have an historic, once-in-a-generation opportunity to deliver relief to hardworking families and set our country back on the path of prosperity. The American people desperately need us to take this action, and we will. As we wrote in a letter to our conference this weekend, time really is of the essence. There's a lot of pressure points that are outside of our control but are forcing this action. We're months away from the X-date on the debt limit. The border security resources are being diminished, markets are unsettled, and the largest tax increase in American history is set to hit families and businesses at the end of this year if we do not act. And for all those reasons, we have no luxury of complacency, and we really don't have time to dither on this thing. So we'll be moving that forward, and you'll see that action this week.
House Speaker Mike Johnson at a news conference with other House Republican leaders. Again, from the Washington Examiner article, the Senate passed a compromise one-bill budget resolution Saturday after both chambers passed competing legislation at the beginning of the year. The budget plan, which includes a $5 trillion increase in the federal debt ceiling, leaves the House and Senate on different pages when it comes to spending offsets. The House instructions would require $2 trillion in cuts, while the Senate only treats that figure as an aspirational goal and sets spending cuts at $4 billion, a figure both hardliner budget hawks and members of the Budget Committee have called unserious and unacceptable. That was from the Washington Examiner article. Congressman Chip Roy, Republican from Texas, told reporters this morning he is a no on the Senate version.
I stand by everything I've said before. $4 billion foreign cuts is clearly not sufficient. It's frankly a joke from the Senate, and it's more of the same swamp stuff that we've been dealing with for years, and so nothing's changed. So, we have to draw a line in the sand now on a budget, and the Senate's budget's not there.
Do you think that there will be a vote on it this week, or is your opposition so strong?
I wouldn't advise it.
Is there anything they can say that would, anything they can say that would reassure you, right? They've been offering
amend the budget to actually reduce spending and to make sure deficits are going to go down. Right now, they literally produced a budget that will have deficits going up. That's what they did. I didn't come here to make deficits go up. The Senate apparently did.
Congressman Chip Roy, Republican from Texas, with reporters this morning. Later in the afternoon, a group of House Republicans met with President Trump, who supports the Senate version at this point of the budget resolution. And CNN's Manu Raju reporting that Congressman Roy said, "All I see are promises. I do not believe in promises in Washington. The Senate has sent a bill to us that doesn't add up," and that he warned Speaker Johnson not to put that budget on the floor this week. He said, "In my view, it will increase the deficit, and I didn't come here to do that." Reporter Chad Pergram of Fox News saying that Congressman Lloyd Smucker, Republican of Pennsylvania, still remains a no on the budget package, saying, "I think we can do better than this bill." House Democrats also met this morning, and Caucus Chair Pete Aguilar of California said at a news conference after that Democrats continue to oppose the House Republican budget plan.
Donald Trump has imposed the largest tax increase in 50 years on every single American. Republican incompetence is crashing the economy with reckless tariffs and bleeding the retirement accounts of Americans dry. We're watching global recession take hold because of the boneheaded policies of one person, which will cause hardworking people to lose their jobs, potentially lose their homes and their health care. At the same time, Republicans in Congress are preparing to cut Medicaid $880 billion so they can give a massive tax cut to billionaires. They are telling us with a straight face that the economic growth will pay for these tax breaks while the economy is in a tailspin. The truth is, passing the Republican budget would be a death blow to the American economy. And the people that get caught in the crossfire of this Republican recession will be hurt most by Medicaid as a tool that Republicans want to chip away at. Congress needs to take away the keys of economic policies like tariffs from this incompetent administration and restore some stability to the economy. House Democrats are going to continue to prioritize the economic needs of the American people by working to bring down costs, make health care more affordable, and look out for everyday Americans.
Congressman Pete Aguilar, Democratic California, House Democratic Caucus Chair, at a news conference with other House Democratic leaders this morning. You're listening to Washington Today. A story from The Hill. Congressman Aguilar said the Democrats won't participate in the vote pairing strategy advanced by Speaker Mike Johnson as a way to kill a push for proxy voting for young parents. He said this is a fake and phony effort. Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, Republican of California, thrust the issue of proxy voting for new parents into the spotlight when she filed a discharge petition forcing legislation to allow it to the floor against the wishes of Republican leaders. But Luna came under intense pressure from fellow Republicans who accused her of freezing floor action and holding up President Trump's domestic agenda in the process, after Speaker Johnson went to unusual lengths to block the effort. That was from The Hill. Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna told reporters this morning why she agreed to this pairing instead of proxy voting.
Just wanted to ask you how you reached this agreement with Speaker Johnson on proxy voting and whether you're happy with the resolution.
So it's basically live and dead pairing. So it's been done since the 105th Congress. We're simply bringing it back and formalizing it. Reached the agreement by picking up the phone and calling him. So.
There was a little bit of criticism from Pedersen and Jacobs about how this resolution really doesn't go far enough, and you should have really stuck to your guns on the proxy voting push. Can you respond to that criticism?
I think that there's been a national botched job on the messaging for this. So this is not for maternity leave. It's simply asking that members that are recovering from childbirth, which, by the way, has not been a huge number, we're talking about 13 in U.S. history, can continue to vote while they're in that recovery phase. And so that's first and foremost the correction. Secondly, I still think that should be obviously an exception that is made. President Trump even backs that position. And I think a lot of people were, thinking that it's going to, break the dam and it's going to be a slippery slope, but that's completely false. And as you saw in the Rules Committee, they actually agreed that proxy voting is not unconstitutional. So that whole argument in itself, I understand people's concerns. However, we're talking about a very, very small number, and we're also talking about the slimmest majority in U.S. history. So this does impact Republicans. What I will tell you is, obviously, it's not what we initially had wanted, but it's a step forward in the right direction. I think it's a good solve for now.
Can I ask you about the pairing resolution?
Yeah.
How does that move forward on the House side?
So basically, it's considered a wash vote. So you partner with someone who's voting opposite of you. It doesn't necessarily have to be a Democrat. It's literally someone who's voting opposite of what your vote is, and then it neutralizes that out and is considered a wash. It was used famously with Murkowski during the Kavanaugh confirmation. It's something that has actually historically been done since the 1800s, and so a lot of people did not know what it was. So we're happy, just like inherent contempt, to bring that discussion to the forefront.
Is this something that's going to be voted on, though, to actually?
Yeah, it's going to be attached to the rule on the SAVE Act, which, by the way, Johnson did not have to shut down the floor last week, so fake news.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, Republican from Florida, speaking to reporters this morning. And when the House did take up that rule for the other bills, and it included this pairing proposal, Congresswoman Brittany Peterson, Democrat from Colorado, who had teamed with Congresswoman Luna on the original proxy voting proposal, sat on the House floor with her 4-month-old son, Sam, in her arms, that paired voting is not good enough.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to the rule that will kill our bipartisan effort to allow parents who have welcomed a new child to vote remotely. I want to thank Representative Luna for her unwavering commitment to giving moms and dads a voice in Congress. A large majority of the members of the House support changing the way we do things here and make it more accessible to young families and more reflective of the American people. But Speaker Johnson pulled out all the stops to prevent us from moving forward. We followed the rules and filed a discharge petition. We got the 218 signatures necessary to bring it to a vote on the floor. But he went to historic lengths to try to stifle our voices, including blocking our resolution today before we even have the opportunity to vote for it. Even the president supports this and doesn't understand why it's so controversial, and neither does the rest of America. Let's be clear, the changes agreed upon by the Speaker are not a win for us. They do not address the challenges that we've worked so hard to overcome. And the Speaker turned his backs on moms and dads in Congress and working families across the country. Congress is stuck in doing things the way that we did hundreds of years ago, and it's time that we move it to the 21st century. And for all the people who have said that I should resign because I can't do my job, you are completely missing the point. I am absolutely capable of doing my job, but because I'm a woman and because I chose to have a baby, I have been prevented from doing so. I want to thank all of the people who have come on both sides of the aisle in supporting this effort, and I know that our fight is far from over and we're not going to back down. And to the people from across the country who have reached out, inspired to see somebody like them who is struggling to manage having a new baby, balancing work, and having a work environment that does not support their needs. So once again, I want to thank Representative Luna for being a champion, as well as Representative Jacobs and Lawler for all their work on this. We won't stop until we finally get this done. And with that, actually, before I'm done, I want to acknowledge Sam, who has now made 4 flights across the country to change hearts and minds and also highlight the need for reform here in Congress.
Congresswoman Brittany Peterson, Democrat from Colorado, with baby Sam in her arms on the House floor. The House passed this resolution 213 to 211 to implement the vote pairing procedure. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Democracy. It isn't just an idea, it's a process shaped by leaders elected to the highest offices and entrusted to a select few with guarding its basic principles. It's where debates unfold, decisions are made, and the nation's course is charted. Democracy in real time. This is your government at work. This is C-SPAN, giving you your democracy unfiltered.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. Attorney General Pam Bondi, writes Fox News, warned illegal immigrant criminals to start packing their bags after the Supreme Court cleared the way for the Trump administration to resume deportation flights under the Alien and Enemies Act after an Obama-nominated judge tried to block it, handing a major boost to the president's crackdown on illegal immigration. Justices on the high court ruled 5-4 to grant the Trump administration's request to vacate a lower court's ruling, barring the use of the Alien Enemies Act, a 1798 wartime immigration law, to immediately deport Venezuelan nationals, including alleged members of the Tren de Aragua gang. The decision also added due process protections for the detainees, meaning they must be given opportunities to challenge their detention via habeas corpus claims. That was from Fox News. Attorney General Bondi was on Fox and Friends this morning and then stopped by to answer reporters' questions in the White House driveway.
2 quick questions, if we can. I'll just ask you about the ruling yesterday from the Supreme Court. Obviously, it allows you to move forward with using the Alien Enemies Act to deport these alleged gang members and others here. It says they're entitled to due process, though, as well. Your take on the ruling and what does it mean for your ability to deport?
Yeah, sure, Peter. What the ruling says is, as from yesterday forward, what we can do is we can still deport, but they are entitled to habeas in the court of confinement, which means all of these cases will go through Texas. There will be no more class actions. It will be 2 questions asked. Do you qualify under Alien Enemies, and are you a violent gang member? Are you a member of TDA? That's what will be asked.
Let me ask you about the DHS. The administration broadly has revoked the legal status of those individuals who came in from south of the border through the CBP app that was produced by the former administration. So should those individuals who follow the rules as they existed at the time be forced to leave the country now?
Well, Peter, the rules at the time weren't fair. The rules were dangerous to Americans. I went to the border in September. I was in Yuma, Arizona, and I saw piles and piles of driver's license, IDs, passports, from every country you can imagine, thrown at the gate. They were handed cell phones, the CBP app, what you were discussing. They could come in, get on a phone, enter the country. If they didn't have ID, then they could identify that they were from any country they chose to be from. A Border Patrol agent told me Venezuelan men were coming in saying they were from China. Chinese people were coming in saying they were from any country, Ireland, any country they wanted to identify that they were from, and they were walking right into our country. So we have to look at all those cases because that's the safety and concern for our citizens.
Attorney General Pam Bondi speaking to reporters in the White House driveway. More than 900,000 people were allowed into the U.S. using the CBP-1 app. Since January 2023, they were generally allowed to remain in the U.S. for 2 years with authorization to work under a presidential authority called parole. That's how Associated Press is reporting it. And speaking of AP, story from CBS News, a federal judge on Tuesday ruled for the Associated Press in its ongoing dispute with the White House and ordered top officials to restore the news outlet's access to the Oval Office, Air Force One, and other spaces when they are open to other members of the press pool. In a 41-page decision, U.S. District Judge Trevor McFadden granted the AP a preliminary injunction blocking the federal government from restricting its access to certain media events because of its decision to continue using the name Gulf of Mexico. President Trump, on his first day in office, issued an executive order renaming the body of water the Gulf of America. That was from CBS News. And from NBC News, the Supreme Court on Tuesday halted a federal judge's ruling requiring several federal agencies to reinstate around 16,000 workers the Trump administration had sought to fire. Associated Press writes that U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said Tuesday the Panama Canal faces ongoing threats from China, but together the U.S. and Panama will keep it secure. Speaking at a ribbon cutting for a new U.S. finance dock at the Vasco Núñez de Balboa Naval Base after a meeting with the Panamanian President, Jose Raul Mulino, Hegseth said the U.S. will not allow China or any other country to threaten the canal's operation. The visit comes amid tensions over U.S. President Donald Trump's repeated assertions that the U.S. is being overcharged to use the Panama Canal and that China has influence over its operations. Panama has denied those allegations. That was from AP. Here's Secretary Hegseth in Panama.
Our relationship with Panama, especially our security relationship, will continue to grow in the months and years ahead. Our relationship is growing in part to meet Communist China's rising challenge. China-based companies continue to control critical infrastructure in the canal area. That gives China the potential to conduct surveillance activities across Panama. This makes Panama and the United States less secure, less prosperous, and less sovereign. And as President Donald Trump has pointed out, that situation is not acceptable. We are grateful to President Mulino, Minister Abrego, and your teams, along with the Panama Canal Authority, for responding to these threats and safeguarding the canal. President Mulino's decision to withdraw from the Belt and Road Initiative reflects his government's clear understanding of China and the threat it poses. I want to be very clear. China did not build this canal. China does not operate this canal. And China will not weaponize this canal. Together with Panama in the lead, we will keep the canal secure and available for all nations through the deterrent power of the strongest, most effective, and most lethal fighting force in the world. We will do this in partnership with Panama. Together, we will take back the Panama Canal from China's influence. And we will do this along with other capable, like-minded allies and partners. This is what peace through strength looks like.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth at a naval base in Panama with the Panamanian president. NBC News reports that the huge deal touted by President Donald Trump as a victory in his campaign to take back the Panama Canal from China could be on the rocks amid pushback from Beijing. The $23 billion sale involving two ports run by C.K. Hutchison a private company based in the Chinese territory of Hong Kong, to a consortium led by U.S. investment firm BlackRock, had originally been scheduled to be signed last week, but an agreement between the two has been delayed under pressure from China, whose market regulator launched a review of the deal as state-run newspapers attacked it as undermining China's national interest. That was from NBC News. From Politico, Republican lawmakers and the commander of U.S. forces in Europe argued Tuesday against withdrawing troops from the continent, clashing with a potential Trump administration plan. U.S. European Command Chief General Christopher Cavoli told the House Armed Services Committee that he's consistently recommended keeping the same troop levels since Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine. It's my advice to maintain that forced posture as it is now, he said. His comments, echoed by some top Republicans, follow reports that the Pentagon is weighing removing up to 10,000 troops from Eastern Europe. That was from Politico. General Cavoli testifying before the House Armed Services Committee, questioned by the chair, Mike Rogers, Republican from Alabama. You'll also hear a second witness, Catherine Thompson, Acting Assistant Defense Secretary for International Security Affairs.
General Cavoli, given Russia's armed forces are mobilized for long-term confrontation, what's your best military advice on whether or not DOD should maintain the current force posture in Europe for the foreseeable future?
Chairman, it's my advice to maintain that force posture as it is now. We have reviewed periodically since in 2022 we originally surged forces forward. We have periodically reviewed the force structure at both the military level and the policy level, and I have consistently recommended throughout that period to maintain the forces we surged forward, and I would continue to do so now if asked. Yeah.
Now, you referenced this in your opening statement. I would like for you to reiterate it. How does the U.S. force posture in Europe contribute to the defense of our homeland as well as our operations in CENTCOM and AFRICOM?
Sir, thanks. Yeah, it's an important part of why we're there. First and foremost, Russian strategic forces. Russia continues to have very powerful strategic forces, thousands of nuclear weapons, and the delivery methods to deliver those. Those are not pointed just any place. Those are pointed, those are there, they exist for America. And our defense against those strategic forces, whether in the air or undersea, begins in the European continent. For example, Russian submarines are mainly stationed with the Northern Fleet up in Murmansk, up in the area east of the northern Nordic countries. They come out of their harbors and they go south between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom, the famous GI-UK gap. We have to bottle them up north of that gap. If they break out into the Atlantic for a variety of reasons, it gets tougher to track them. And from those positions, they can hold the country at risk. So our maritime efforts, which are greatly aided by the efforts of our allies, their maritime patrol aircraft, their anti-submarine helicopters, their destroyers, all of our efforts together, but built around America's exquisite capabilities, that's the first line of defense against Russian subs. If we look to the south, we participated in the defense of Israel early this year. U.S. Central Command led a brilliant campaign with the Israelis and some other allies to protect against Iranian attacks against Israel. The ballistic missile defense part of that comes off of EUCOM ships in the Eastern Mediterranean. The refuelers come out of EUCOM. The airspace control comes out of EUCOM. We do the same for AFRICOM and everybody else. It's really because of our proximity and our familiarity with the area. The bases that we have in Europe and the legal permissions we have with nations hosting us give us the ability to project power quickly in our interest on behalf of our U.S. unilateral interests.
Thank you, General. Ms. Thompson, given everything you've just heard, does the department support maintaining its current posture of U.S. forces in Europe for the foreseeable future?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. The department right now is undergoing a global force posture review, and so we are taking into account not only the dynamics in EUCOM, but in all of our theaters, and evaluating that based on President Trump's stated interests and sizing our force and our resources appropriately to that. No decisions have been made at this time as part of that global force posture review. It is ongoing.
I think that the ranking member and I have made it very clear in our previous correspondence to the department, and I think in this opening statements, you should be focused on maintaining the surge posture that we've had in Europe since the conflict was started by Russia for the foreseeable future.
Congressman Mike Rogers, Republican from Alabama, chair of the Armed Services Committee, questioning Catherine Thompson, acting Assistant Defense Secretary for International Security Affairs, and General Christopher Cavoli, NATO Supreme Allied Commander and U.S. European Command Commander. Mike Rogers referring to the ranking Democrat on the committee, that's Adam Smith of Washington State. From Fox News, Elbridge Colby will now assume the Pentagon's number 3 post after a contentious Senate battle ended in a vote to confirm him to the role. The Senate voted 51-45 to confirm the national security strategist as Defense Department Undersecretary for Policy, with 3 Democrats joining most Republicans in voting in his favor. Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, was the lone Republican no vote. Senator McConnell putting out a statement that reads in part, "The prioritization that Mr. Colby argues is fresh, new, and urgently needed is in fact a return to an Obama-era conception of a la carte geostrategy, abandoning Ukraine and Europe and downplaying the Middle East to prioritize the Indo-Pacific is not a clever geopolitical chess move. It's a geostrategic self-harm that emboldens our adversaries and drives wedges between America and our allies for them to exploit." That was part of the statement from Senator McConnell. Vice President J.D. Vance posting on X, "Mitch's vote today, like so much of the last few years of his career, is one of the great acts of political pettiness I've ever seen." State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce got a question today at her news conference in Washington about this article from AFP. The United States has ended emergency food aid for 14 countries, endangering the lives of millions of hungry or starving people. A United Nations agency said Monday. World Food Program, which was already grappling with a 40% drop in funding for this year, said it had been advised of the new American aid halt to 14 countries. That was from AFP. Here's the question to the State Department spokesperson, Tammy Bruce.
Can you give us any clarity on the cuts, the latest cuts, not including the Burma stuff, but the cuts to USAID and funding to the World Food Program that happened essentially over the weekend? Because I understand there may have been some changes to those cuts.
Well, yes. So let me get to those details because that is important. We have one thing we can say, because this is a large conversation and various different countries are involved. First of all, 85% of previously existing USAID programs with the World Food Program worldwide remain active and ongoing. So that's 85% when we're talking about the effort that the country has made and continues to make. So it is inaccurate, as some have intimated, that USAID has defunded the World Food Program. That is not true. Or that we've broadly backed away from our commitments to providing life-saving food aid. We've said from the beginning that our commitment to foreign aid remains. It may look different than it has in the past. But in this case, 85% of those USAID programs with the World Food Program worldwide remain active. We have terminated a limited number of World Food Program programs based on specific country or program level priorities. But what is the story here is that the largest group of World Food Program awards terminated were in Yemen and Afghanistan through an executive order that was issued, based on concern that the funding was benefiting terrorist groups, including the Houthis and the Taliban. These concerns with UN funding have been documented and discussed for years, which is why USAID paused all food assistance in northern Yemen through WFP, specifically to mitigate any interference by the Houthis, and has intermittently suspended food assistance across Afghanistan to mitigate Taliban interference. Other awards were terminated because they provided cash-based assistance, which the administration is moving away from, given concerns about misuse and lack of appropriate accountability for American taxpayers here at home, of course, and the accountability they deserve. There were a few programs that were cut in other countries that were not meant to be cut. that have been rolled back and put into place. So when and if that happens, that's recognized, and that has also been the case with something as complicated as this framework. We do what is necessary to maintain the commitments that fit within the framework of keeping America safe, secure, as well as making sure that they apply the nature of our priorities and values as well.
State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce at her news conference in Washington. And thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.